Let me welcome those of you that are joining us online. We're so glad that you are. You know what? Why don't we give it up for them? You guys want to help me welcome them? Yeah. We're so glad that you're joining us. Now, we're in the middle of this series called Dash, and we're talking about legacy. Like, how do we live a legacy? And I got to thinking about this week, like the idea of legacy, and I started thinking about it like from my perspective, like from me. Because here's the truth about me. I'm middle-aged, not Brad Pitt. My kids tell me I try too hard. I'm not a social media influencer. Look, I like to go to bed at 9:45. I'm just like an average guy. Does anybody else ever feel just like an average human being? Anybody else? It's like, no, I don't want to stay up till 10. If the game starts at 8:30, I'm going to make the first half. That's it. Right? Yeah, I know there's a bunch of you are like, yeah, I'm pretty average. And that's how I feel. I feel like, what does legacy look like for someone who just feels average? Like, just living life. And I got to thinking about it this week, and there's a story in the scriptures that I actually think speaks to anybody that ever looks at their life and goes, it's just sort of like a life, right? Like, I'm not a sports star, I'm just average. There's this passage we're gonna look at, and it's 4 short chapters, literally. You could read it in 15 minutes. And let me spoiler alert this book that we're going to walk through this morning. There are no murders. There are no villains. There's no parting of the Red Sea, no salvation from genocide, no ark, no fire falling from heaven. It is a story that feels like someone like me. And if you relate with that, then it's a story that might be a lot like you. Just someone going about their life. The passage, the story, is found in the Old Testament, and it's the book of Ruth. Now, Ruth is sort of like if you open up your Bible and you go to the first 8, it's sort of right there, right after Judges. And if I were to sum up what I see in the 4 chapters of Ruth, I see a great God story. But this is the kicker. This great God story in this passage highlights actually what is often at play in Scripture. Average people with nothing really all that special, completely surrendered to a really great God. In fact, if you go throughout Scripture, Ruth isn't all that unusual. That great God stories are often predicated with really average people, just sort of showing up. So, if you have your Bibles, you can open to them. If you have your phones, you can sort of get to it a little bit quicker. But let me open up and give you a little backstory to this great God story. It starts right from the jump in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, when it says this: in the days when the judges ruled, there was famine in the land. Now, this is really important. Scripture's letting you know 2 things right here in the very first sentence. Number 1, the days that the judges ruled, these were not good times. A lot of instability. Israel was worshiping a bunch of different gods. It wasn't good. And then in the next sentence it says, then there was famine. Economic calamity. This is the setup for the story that centers, or at least starts, around 4 people. The Bible then tells you, so a man from Bethlehem decides he is going to move. Together with his wife and 2 sons, they went to live for a while in the country of Moab because things aren't good, right? They're trying to make a way. So a mom, a dad, and 2 sons, they moved to Moab. The Bible tells us now in verse 3 that the man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and they had their 2 sons. Then in verse 4, it says that as they get to this new land, what was bad, right? There was economic trouble. There was famine in the land. The Bible tells us that the dad dies. So it goes from not very good to a little bit worse for the rest of the family. Now in verse 4, it'll tell you that the 2 sons find wives there in that foreign land. They get married, and then the kicker, the two sons die. So here's a family that has been completely upended. They went to leave their country to find something better. They get to something better, and it ends up being something worse. And Naomi, the mom, knows that what is about to happen to her in her culture is going to be devastating, because here's the reality. She knows that life as an unmarried foreign woman is going to be exceedingly difficult. And so she looks at her two daughter-in-laws and says, listen, you can't stay here. In fact, in verse 8, she says this, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you've shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. She says, look, you've been great in-laws. You've been so good to me. But if you stay with me, you will die. We won't make it. And so doing what a kind mother-in-law would do, she looks at these two women who now have lost their husbands and say, look, go home. Because if you go home, you go back and be with your family. You can find a husband. You'll find a life. There is no life with me. So the first in-law, Orpah, takes her up on it, and she leaves. And it's a wise decision. Look, this is a wise decision. Go home, start over. But Ruth does something different. Now, the verse I'm about to read to you is like one of these classic verses, and so often, like when I do weddings, I will talk to brides and grooms to be, and I'll say, hey, what verses would you want in your wedding? Oftentimes this verse is the one that shows up because it's absolutely beautiful. Ruth, in this moment of absolute, there's some fortitude in her, says, no. I hear what you're saying, Naomi, but I'm going to show up for you. I'm not leaving. She says this in verse 16, chapter 1, don't ask me to leave you and to turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be married. And you can see why people love this verse in their wedding. Until I tell them that you do realize she's talking to her mother-in-law. But this is Ruth's moment, right? This is Ruth's moment. Now remember, this is a huge deal for Ruth to show up in this way. Remember, this is Ruth trying to do the right thing. She's married an Israelite in her homeland. He is now dead. And if she stays with Naomi, she will probably be now moving away from her homeland, her heritage. She's already left her mother and father, her religious system that she learned as a child. She's given up all that she'd known. And yet in this moment, she shows up. And she does the right thing. You know, we are a product of the movies we watch, the books that we read. And often in the stories that we love most, it is this moment that we have an expectation about what should come next. Think about it. All the great movies that you've ever seen, all the books you love it when someone stands up and does the right thing, right? Against all odds. And now in the movie, what comes next should be blessing, right? You stand up, you do the right thing. It's sort of like we look at life and legacy. We look at these stories and we apply like geometry to it. You remember geometry? I barely do. But Archimedes said this. He says, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And oftentimes, we think about life in these exact same way, that I'm going to do the right thing, and it should be a straight line to blessing, right? Like if I do the right thing, the next thing should be all the good stuff. I'm sure that Ruth thought the same thing, and yet, at the very beginning of chapter 2, after this poignant moment when Ruth does exactly what she should do, let me read what happens. Ruth chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Now Naomi had a relative in of her husband, a worthy man of the clan of Amalek, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, Ruth, who just did the right thing, said to Naomi, 'Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain.'" Now, on the surface, you read this and go, okay, cool. She's going to go farm. If you don't know what the word glean means, then you don't really know what's happening. You see, gleaning has a very specific meaning. In fact, the idea of gleaning was around until the 19th century, and there were laws on the books in England that still allowed this. What gleaning is how culture took care of the poorest of the poor. Farmers were mandated to leave some scraps in their field after the harvest, and what was allowed is the poorest of the poor could then go through the field and pick up the scraps. This is the equivalent of a soup kitchen. This is for the destitute. So think about it. Ruth stands up and does the right thing. And in the very next breath, she finds herself in a soup kitchen. This isn't the way it's supposed to go, right? When we think about our legacies, we think, my goodness, if I show up and do the right thing, then what should happen next is something really good. But have any of you had a moment in your life where you did the right thing and it didn't go the way you hoped it would? Where you look back and go, wait, I did the right thing. I said the right thing. I showed up in the right way, and it wasn't a straight line. In fact, I was thinking about how do you visualize how it actually is oftentimes in life, and I feel like it looks like this. Anybody else? Or you make this decision, and then all of a sudden the twists and the turns, and it makes your head spin. Our legacies, our lives are often filled with zigzags. And this is such a great challenge. Understanding that life is filled with curveballs, because if you believe that I'm going to do the right thing and what happens next is blessing, that my dreams are just going to come true, you might find yourself at best disappointed, but at worst convinced that maybe God doesn't care about you. I think this is why last week's message, if you didn't get it or didn't get to hear it, I would say, please go back and listen to Michelle's message about what happens when life doesn't go the way that we hoped it would. It is a powerful reminder that life is oftentimes filled with zigzags. And this story is so helpful because it reminds us that great God stories are often filled with curveballs and zigzags. But Ruth, she continues to just show up. Nobody's looking, no tweets, no heroic ending. She just goes to work. Now, for those of you that believe in hard work, this next part of the story you're going to love. I mean, because think about it. We as Americans, this is what we believe in, right? We're like, listen, you put your head down, you pull your boots up, and you work. This is what I was taught. My grandfather worked the steel mills in Granite City, Illinois. I came from stock that said, listen, you put your hand to this thing and you go. And you see it in Ruth. So she stood up, does the right thing, right? And it's her idea to go to the soup kitchen. When she shows up at the field, she goes to work. There is no moping. There is no crying, because there's no crying in baseball. She just does it. And the Bible tells us that something happens. In Ruth chapter 2, verse 4, Boaz arrives from Bethlehem. Now, Boaz owns this field that she is gleaning. And he's greeted by the harvester. Lord be with you, he said. Then Boaz asked the foreman, who's that young girl over there? So he sees her. Like she's just crushing it. She's just going for it. He says, who does she belong to? The foreman replies, she's the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain. She came forward, said, listen, can I glean here? If she could gather grain behind the harvester, she's been hard at work ever since. Boaz noticed her. The foreman notices her. And if standing up and doing the right thing isn't the part of the story where God shows up and does good things, certainly this is, right? She's now stood up, done the right thing, and now she's put her head down and worked. And so Boaz goes over, and you can almost feel it. Here's our Hollywood ending. He's going to go over, and he says to her, he says, listen, my daughter. This is in verse 9 and verse 8. Stay right here with us. When you gather grain, don't go to any other fields. He says, listen, I see you. I see what you're doing. Stay right here. Stay behind the young woman working in my field. See which part of the field they're harvesting and follow them. He's giving her little pointers on where to get the most food. And then he says to her, I've warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you're thirsty, help you with water. But it's interesting because I was talking to my father about this just recently. And my dad's like old school. I don't know if you have old school. My dad grew, he trained me in the ways of Jesus. My dad, though, he reads the King James, right? That's the only translation. There's like 7 of you. The rest of us don't know what it means, right? Well, my dad, he reads the King James. And so my dad was like, well, son, I was reading that passage you've been preaching out of, and I saw something. And I said, well, what did you see, Pop? He said, son, look in the King James in Ruth chapter 2, verse 16, because this means something. And I went back and I read it. And it's interesting because at this point of the story, this is when God's supposed to show up. But I want you to see what it reads in the King James. It says, as Boaz was talking to Ruth, he says, and let also fall some of the handfuls of purpose for her. I don't like that verse. Because the truth is, in my story, when I do the right thing, I don't want a handful of purpose. I want a dump truck. Anybody else? Right? Anybody else? Like, oh, no. I hear what you're saying, Boaz. Handful's nice. Not looking for a handful, looking for a dump truck. I've done the right thing. I showed up in work. Now give me mine. But that isn't what happens. And it's interesting because I get it because we live in this culture of more, right? More likes, more money, more house, more things. And because of this, there is this idea in each and every one of us that if a little of something is good, then a lot of something must be better, right? That just more. God, show up with more direction, more good things. And it forced me to ask myself this question. Eric, how much really is enough for you? How much is enough for you to believe that you're in God's will? How much does God have to show you for you to believe that He's for you? A handful's not enough. Because here's what's interesting about the journey with Jesus. And you see it throughout Scripture that our purpose is often exposed in small handfuls. That's not just true of you and me. I mean, go back to the children of Israel. Isn't this the story in Exodus? that God was consistently providing provisional purpose, right? They've been brought out of slavery, taken into the desert, and what does God do? He brings them just enough every single day, a handful of purpose in the form of manna. Just enough for that morning. They couldn't keep it, it would rot. They tried to store it up, it wouldn't work. It was just enough. Why? Why is it that God often, in the midst of us doing what he's asked us to do, he shows up in what feels like small ways? And I was thinking, like, why? Why, God? Why do you do that? Why don't you dump all your provision on me right now? Just dump it on me right now. And I was thinking about it. I don't know if you have a teenager, had a teenager, or will have a teenager. For those of you in the latter category, I'm already sorry. But I have one right now, and it was interesting because we went to Park Meadows Mall. This was just recently. And this is a great example of why I think God uses provisional purpose. We were walking through the mall, and I was completely under the impression that we were going to the mall together. That's what I thought we were doing. So I'm walking, and I keep looking around trying to find Harry. He's like 7 steps behind me. And I know if I say, hey, Harry, why don't you come up here with me? He's not going to. So I thought, well, I'll just be smart and I'll start going slower, right? And pretty soon he catches up with me, and then he passes me. And then I'm chasing him around the mall. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me. I'm here with him at the mall. He's not here with me. And isn't that sometimes how we are with God? He's made himself available to us all the time, in every single moment, and yet we're off walking through life on our own most of the time. And it dawned on me, this is why provisional purpose, that maybe his greatest blessing is handfuls. Because if I'm given my full inheritance, maybe I'm going to act like the prodigal son. I'm just going to go blow it. Move my eyes off God. You see, provisional purpose creates dependency on him. It makes me see him. It makes me look for him. It makes me walk with him. See, the greatest challenge in our lives when we think about average people in great God stories is we often think we're not in one because of the zigzags or the provisional purpose. That maybe because everything's moving around in crazy ways and we don't understand it, and maybe because we're just getting just enough, maybe we're not in a great God story. But Ruth's story says otherwise. How do we know? Because of the very ending. Now listen, spoiler alert. We could do a whole series on Ruth in this, but I'll tell you that her and Boaz fall in love, they have a family, and then it skips to the end, really, really fast, and there's a genealogy. Now listen, I know most of you read past your genealogies, but I've gotten real interested in genealogies recently. I don't know if you've done like one of these like ancestors.com or the DNA cup where you spit in the cup and then they send you back your stuff, but I think it's fascinating. In fact, I've probably started more conversations in the last 6 months about, hey, did you know I was 34% English and I'm 24% Scottish and I'm 12% Irish? And of course, everybody looks at me and says, of course you are, look at you. You needed a test for that. But it's really fascinating when we think about our ancestry and our genealogy, and it does mean something to us. And so if you skipped over genealogy in this story, you missed the story. And I won't read it all to you because it just reads through like ancestors.com of where Ruth came from. But the very last verse says it all. Of what God is up to in real great God stories. When it says this, Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. God was up to something all the time. Because David is the line that Jesus will come from. This little normal average person who just showed up, Jesus came from. And here's what's crazy. Do you know on Ruth's deathbed, she would have had no idea. She would have looked at her life and said, I don't know, I just showed up for my family. I just showed up for my mother-in-law. I just showed up in the field. And yeah, I got a family out of it, but did I do anything great? Did I have a great God story? You know what she'd have said? No, I don't think so. But see, God was up to something. See, if you think your life is just average, then in this story you are in good company, because here's what I'm learning. The power of Ruth's story says to people like me, the greatness isn't in you. Your job is just to show up. Just show up. Wherever you've been planted, just show up. In your house, show up. With your kids, show up. In your church, show up. You don't need to be an influencer or have a microphone or a platform. You just got to be present. And the truth is, in this day and age, this might be one of the biggest challenges we all face, right? The ability to be fully present in any moment. Present. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I wrote this down because I've been thinking about the power of great God stories, and that maybe all God's asking me to do is to just show up. To be present with the ability to see right now what is happening without referring to the past or dreaming about the future. Don't you see that in Ruth? At any moment, she could have said, I'm not showing up anymore. This whole life stinks. Nothing good's come my way. I'm just on some crazy journey that who knows where it ends. She could have referenced her past as to reason to not show up now, or she could have just always been daydreaming about, well, maybe someday and maybe just if, but instead Ruth was firmly planted in the moment. Just showing up. And it's interesting because every now and again we do learn from our children. Anybody had a child teach you a lesson? Yeah, I did 2 days ago. When my 21-year-old, we were sitting out, we were in Denver, and his girlfriend was in town. He's home from school. And she asked him, she said, hey, Gray, open up your camera roll. And he did, and she started teasing him because the last time he took a picture was 3 months ago. 3 months ago. She goes, you haven't taken a picture in 3 months? Like, why aren't you taking pictures right now? Take some pictures of us. And he said this most poignant thing. He said, well, I hadn't taken pictures today because I've just been busy being in today. I thought, well, that's it, isn't it? Too often we're rushing through life trying to get to places and we're missing this moment, right? We miss the moment when we're putting our kids to bed because we're worried about this game and what's going to happen, or this show. Or we rush through conversations with our spouses because our mind is somewhere in the future or somewhere in the past. But Ruth is a story of she just showed up. We're missing moments every day with Jesus because we don't stop and carve out time with him in the morning. Instead, we carve out time at the gym, and that's all good. Or we carve out time to work. We carve out time to worry, but not with him. These great God stories are just stories of people who consistently just show up. They find a place to contribute in their churches. And you say, but I'm just on the parking team. No, you're not. You're showing up. And every great God story starts with someone who shows up. They just show up. So what would it look like if we showed up? And I know that so often we look at Scripture and we go, okay, that was true thousands of years ago. But is that really, it's just showing up, Eric? The truth is, yeah. Because there are stories all around this place of people who are choosing, like Ruth, to show up. To just show up. And I could tell you their stories, but I think it'd be cool if you heard their stories for yourself. Check this out.
We have a heart for singing with children. Our background is music. We asked the children's director at the time, can we come in and sing with the little children? And that's how it got started.
We would sit down and try to be calm with them and sit on their little chairs, eye to eye. We just started singing this little light of mine, and when those little kids started putting that finger up, oh, we were hooked.
We're seed planters. We're not bringing the growth. That's God. We might not be watering. If we can plant those little tiny seeds, we've got folks that walk up to us that are in their 30s and 40s and say, we used to sing those songs. So think about who planted those seeds 35 years ago. And if that's what we're doing now for those precious little souls, that's exactly what we need to do. And that's exactly what God is doing through us. That's how he's using us. The most important thing that I'm doing all week long is to come sing with those little children. We've been singing a minimum of 10 plus years with the little kids. And it's amazing because now we're seeing several of those children that actually started in diapers are actually the helpers that are singing with us. That's a very rewarding thing to see how the Lord is using those young lives and how he's using us in a manner that is worthy of his name.
I was called to my first mission trip when I was 13 years old. I knew that the Lord was calling me overseas to do something bigger. I spent my entire 30s back in school studying medicine because I knew that I could quickly do medical missions all over the globe. About 80% of the time, there's nothing I can medically do for them when I go in country. Medicine is the door that opens to get us in country. The reason we go is to share Jesus. The door gets opened up so wide when people ask me questions. Smiling at them, touching their shoulder, asking about their children, something so simple as that, it opens a door. They always ask me, why are you here? Why do you smile so much? Why are you so happy? Why are you here helping us? And all I have to say is, have you heard of Jesus? I'm here to love you. I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. What can I do for you? When they come from a distinct culture that mainly offers persecution, offers sadness and despair, when somebody walks in with a smile, they may not know who Jesus is, but by the time they walk out, they're going to know what Jesus does for that person. Our God is grace and mercy and peace, and we plant that seed.
On a Saturday morning, we go to the laundromat, we give out coupons to do free laundry, and we talk to people and make friends with them.
We have families, we have singles, we have folks that are really down on their luck. We have homeless guys that come in just to get some clean bedding and some clean clothes. Shows that we care and shows that God can reach out and touch people. We've built a lot of good relationships, and a lot of our friends have now come to church on a regular basis. Most of these folks don't feel like they're part of any kind of a social group.
We make them feel like they belong. It's simple. We smile at them, we talk to them, we listen, pray if they want to pray, show Jesus' love by loving them. It's the greatest commandment. Love the Lord, love your neighbor. These are my neighbors.
Well, you just got to remember it's not about you. It's about what he's dropped into your heart.
Use your talent. Use what the Lord's given you. It doesn't matter what it is. It's vital. It's critical. And he'll bless you for it.
I feel like I'm doing what God wants me to do. Help people as I can where they're at. God didn't put us here to be alone and just to take and take and take.
Being a missionary does not have to be some huge experience going overseas. There's a mission field everywhere. Understanding God's calling and following it. We have such a short time here. What are we going to do when we're standing at the gates? And you want to be able to tell the story, Lord, this is what, I tried to accomplish for you.
Plum Creek, sometimes I worry that all of us underestimate the power of just showing up. That we overestimate the power of our plans, the power of our pocketbook, the power of our personalities, and we fail to recognize that every great God story is just average people who choose to show up in Jesus' name and for his glory. Everyone. Great God stories for average people is just showing up. Let me say this, that sometimes you hear that, and in a room this size, there might be a ping in your heart because maybe you haven't shown up. Maybe you failed with your kids, or maybe you failed with your grandkids, or maybe you haven't shown up for your spouse, or maybe you haven't shown up in your community, in your local church. But here's what's great about all of this. You start showing up today. You just can. Never underestimate the power of your presence, fueled by the unbelievable presence of the Holy Spirit. There's power in it. You could start today. You could start showing up, and here's what's beautiful about all this. It doesn't really matter if you're talented. A lot of you are like, I don't know if I have much talent, if I know how to do this. Here's what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians. He says, do you know that God's power, it isn't made great, it isn't really good. He says, it is perfected in your weakness. So if you're like, I don't really know, I'm feeling kind of weak. Perfect. You're in a good spot. Just show up. Just show up. Watch what happens when you sign up and start contributing. Watch what happens when you make a little time for your wife, your husband, your spouse. Watch what happens when you do this with Jesus. Watch what happens. Because here's what we know. Actually, Scripture is littered with great God stories, and these stories are not about great people. They are stories about average people who show up and let a great God do what he does.